Everybody needs a break every now and then, right?
Amen.
Good thing, good thing. All right. Let's see. I want to recap, though, kind of go back where we were a couple of weeks ago out of 1 Samuel chapter 30, just to kind of remind you of that story, because we're going to kind of jump out of that, but it is going to start us off where David has basically the whole world closing in on him. David is in a situation, so I'm just going to kind of paraphrase the story just for time's sake to kind of catch us up and remind everybody where he was and what he was dealing with. David is, number one, he is on the run from Saul, so his life is on the line. Saul's trying to catch him and kill him, so he's on the run, but he's not on the run by himself. He has his family with him, his wife, children, livestock, all that stuff is with him, as well as all of his men. All of his men and their families are with them, and they are fleeing the wrath of Saul. So they have had to leave their homes, their places of comfort. They've had to leave their own land. And they've actually had to kind of join forces with the enemy. They've actually found the Philistines have kind of received them in. So now they are encamped in the land of the enemy because, they're trying to work out some kind of deal. And it even looks like David at one point in time is going to have to join forces with the Philistines against his own people, Israel. Thankfully, that did not happen. The Philistines didn't quite trust David that much. And so David's actually upset about this because he doesn't know where else they're going to go or what else they're going to do. And so when him and his men returned back, though, to where they had left their families and their possessions and their livestock, the Amalekites had came in that time and had stolen everything. They had kidnapped their entire families. They had burned and destroyed every material possession that they had left there. And so if you're David in this situation, that is a back into the corner type scenario where, number one, your life is already on the line, and it's so severe that you've actually went and joined forces with the enemy trying to find some relief. But then in the process of doing that, now your whole family has been taken from you. And not just your family, but the men who have been trusting you, their families as well. And so in chapter 30, about verse 6, we find that it's getting so bad that David's men are actually considering stoning him and killing him because they're fed up with this. They're tired of being on the run. They're tired of all the things that they've had to deal with. And so if you're David and you're dealing with all of this stuff and you're trying to process it, that's a lot of stuff. I may have a lot going on in life, and you may have a lot going in life, but I don't think anybody in this room is dealing with quite the weight that David is dealing with here. That's a lot of stuff to have to rifle through. And so verse 6, though, tells us something. It says in verse 6 of 1 Samuel chapter 30, it says that, and David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But look at what it says in the last part. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. And I want to come back to that because I want to talk further a little bit more about that. Is David in this midst of the whole world collapsing in on him? He's got a lot of options here. He's got a lot of options as to how to respond to this specific scenario. First of all, he could freak out. He could absolutely just freak out right now and lose his mind and go insane because his family's gone, his men's families are gone, they're trying to kill him, Saul's trying to kill him, the enemy won't even let him join his camp. He could just completely lose his mind in this scenario and just go wild. David could begin to point fingers and blame other people that had you not done this, and had you not done this, and had he could do that. David could ball up in a ball of condemnation and fear and just let him kill him and just believe that he deserved it and he worthed it because of his dumb choices and his bad mistakes, and had I not done this. There's a lot of ways in which David could have responded to something like this, but instead of doing all of that, David withdrew from the scenario and he strengthened himself in the Lord. David went and got alone with the Lord. That is what I want to call this morning a skill. I want to refer to that as a skill that every Christian should possess. But it's one of those skills that as we go through life, it actually is a skill like any other skill that needs to be honed and perfected. something that we are called to not only do, but get increasingly better at as time goes on. And the skill is that in these moments where we have 1,000 different options as to how to respond to these trials, what our goal is for my knee-jerk immediate reaction is to withdraw into the Lord. Before I give my emotions, my fears, my mouth, anything like that, the opportunity to begin a response, I immediately just turn to the Lord. I immediately turn to prayer. I immediately turn to His counsel, and I do it quicker and quicker and quicker every single time. That's a skill. But I think that we can look at our lives and see why that is necessary. Because I'm not trying to be doom and gloom here this morning, and I'm not trying to put fear on you or anything like that. Y'all know better than that. But the Word does teach us that our enemy is like a roaring lion, and he's out there roaming to and fro, doing what? Seeking who he can devour. So, as you go through life, it's inevitable. It's inevitable. At some point in time, maybe even this week, you're going to face some kind of trial. There's going to be some kind of resistance come against you probably this week, and it's going to come in who knows what kind of level, to what kind of gravity, we don't know, but life has challenges, right? That is just part of being here on this earth, living in a broken world. We have stuff that comes against us. We have situations that are less than ideal. Some are not such a big deal. Some are a really big deal. This could be financial, it could be marital, it could be health related, it could be spiritual related. I mean, it could be job related. There's just tons of different scenarios in which some sort of less than ideal situation can be presented in front of us. And I don't know if anybody's going to face anything quite as severe as what David's facing here. But if this is David's response in the face of this severe of a situation, certainly it would be more than adequate in our little situations that we may face. But what happens is when this stuff happens, I'm not going to say if it happens, I'm going to say when it happens. When things at work aren't going right, when finances don't seem to be working out, when marriages hit speed bumps and rough places, when relationships, friendships, family situations arise and there's discord and drama, when all of this stuff happens, whatever the situation may be, we have to be careful, because in that moment where the situation is being presented to us, that is a very, very volatile, vulnerable place. Because how you decide to respond in that moment is going to determine a lot of things after that. How I compose myself and respond to this situation is going to make a humongous difference as to what's going to happen next. And in the face of these resistances, these trials, one of the biggest enemies that we have is our emotions. Y'all agree with that? Like, don't you just wish you could tell your emotions to just shut up? Like, just stop. But the emotions are directly related, matter of fact, to what the Bible refers to as the heart of man. So if you look up the translation in the Strong's of when any time in the Bible when it's referring to the heart of man, part of that definition is his emotions. That's directly where your emotions are linked to, the heart. That's where your intellect, your will, your desires, your plans, and even your emotional responses all come from the heart. So whenever something pops up in front of us and says, boo, our heart immediately wants to react and respond with an appropriate emotional response. But how often is that emotional response the right response? How often is my emotions in agreement with God's truth and God's will for my life and how He wants me to respond? I'm going to answer for myself and say not very often. Situations that arise where my emotional response is to be afraid, but that's not God's will. That's not the truth. My emotional response is to be angry and hold a grudge, but that's not in line with God. My emotional response is to condemn and slander, but that's not God's truth or God's will for my life either. So the skill is to be able to not only recognize that, but to shut that off and allow ourselves to do something that Paul commands us to do in Scripture, and that is to walk in the Spirit. A lot of times when we think of walking in the Spirit, we just think of that maybe first time in the morning when you wake up and I want to do the will of God throughout the day. But we got to realize that walking in the Spirit consists of also, in the face of that adversity, I want to walk in the Spirit, which means I need to respond in the Spirit. And that's going to be hard to do if I'm trusting what my emotions are saying and what my emotions are guiding me to do. It's going to have a little bit of a hindrance there. So in Hebrews chapter 5, you may remember this verse. We looked at it a few weeks ago, where Paul is talking about solid food. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 14. Paul says, but solid food is for the mature. So if you remember, we talked about this of people of great faith. This is something people of great faith do. That solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. And I love the fact that Paul says that. He says they have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice. That's why I call this a skill. Because it's something that we are called to practice. We're called to repetitively apply this over and over and over with every situation that comes. This is something that we are perfecting and growing up in more and more and more as life throws challenges our way. So I may not be great at it right now, but I have a hope and an expectation that this time next year I'll be better. And then the next year I'll be even better. And the next year I'll be even better. So the thing, though, I see here is responsibility. When I see that word trained and practice, I see a responsibility. I see that God blesses me with the wisdom. God blesses me with discernment. God blesses me with all of the things that I need to overcome the challenges. But it is my responsibility to get to know these things, to perfect and grow in handling these things. In other words, God puts the tools in your hands and says, now, through the Spirit, I'm going to work with you to perfect how to use them better. How to use these tools, how to use these weapons. We know that David said in Psalms, he says that the Lord prepares a table for me. Where at? In the presence of my enemies, right? A lot of times we don't understand that. We'll say that, but we don't understand the picture there. That the Lord prepares a table for me in the presence of my enemies, which means my enemies are present at the very moment that I'm sitting at the table communing with God. Now we would sit there and be like, Lord, it's going to be real hard for me to sit down and eat and enjoy this meal that you have made with these guys still standing around wanting to kill. Why don't you kill them first and then we can sit down and eat in peace? But the call here is to sit and commune with him while the enemies are present. That's the point. Because the point there is to show that you serve and are in relationship with the one true God. Yeah. That is the display of the power of God. That while my enemies are present, I'm communing with him in perfect peace. That my enemies do not determine whether or not I sit with him in peace. You get that? My situation does not have to be ideal for God to be good. My situation does not have to be ideal for me to be able to experience him in an intimate, peaceful, joyful way. Because my enemy does not determine the goodness of my God. That's the display of his power. So for us who we think that there's no way that I can come to church joyful, Wesley, I've got this going on. Look, I understand. But don't let the presence of your enemies convince you that you cannot experience the joy of the Lord right now. Don't let the presence of your enemies ever convince you, because they are not the Lord. They are not the determining factor here. And so God wants us to sit at that table while they are present, because it puts his glory and his power and his authority on display. That they don't get to determine that. So in the same scenario, David in this situation has multiple options, but instead he chooses to sit at that table while his circumstance is still going on. His family's still kidnapped. His stuff is over there still smoldering. His men are still holding rocks in their hands, ready to stone him. But David's sitting at the table. If we choose to go with our emotions, though, when Paul says this is something that is, they've practiced this, they've trained themselves, they've done this repetitively, consistently, getting faster and better at it every time. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, Paul says, for we walk by faith and not by sight. I want you to think about that, what that means. We walk by faith. We live by faith, not by sight. So I want you to think about your sight. Your sight, your visible sight, is your senses. That's one of your senses, right? And you've come to trust that vision, right? You've come to trust that if my eyes see a ledge here, I trust that there is a ledge there. Now, if you have 20/20 vision, though, let's say you have perfect vision, but we turn all the lights out and we board this room up and it gets completely dark, how good is that 20/20 vision going to do you? It's not going to be worth much, is it? You're right there on par with somebody here who's stark blind. You know what I mean? It's what I'm saying is it's limited. Even in its strongest state, this sense that you trust so much is incredibly limited. Or it doesn't have to be pitch dark, but there's only so far that you can see. Andrew has really good vision, and we could be driving down the road, and if the road sign is far enough, she can't read it. It's just too far away. No matter how good your vision is, I just can't see it. So this sense that we trust an incredible amount is limited. It can only do so much. And the same can be said with our emotions as well as our intellect. Because all of these things stem from the heart of man. David is at a point here to where his intellect, his wisdom, his inner strength, his determination, his grit, all these things that have brought him incredibly far, but they're out right now. You ever been in a situation like that? Where you have fought, and you made it pretty far. But eventually, you kind of get to the point where you're like, I ain't got no fight left. I don't know what else to do. I don't know how else to respond. I don't know what else I can come up. I'm out. And it's amazing how far you got. But now you find yourself in a position where your limitations have been revealed. That's a good thing. That's actually a good thing. When we get to that point where we have nowhere else to turn, that's a good thing. Because now we can finally get to the point where we probably should have started. And that's where we finally just rest. I believe that's where David got to the point where he's like, you know what? I'm just going to lean into the Lord. I'm just going to rest. How many of y'all have testimony? I know I do. Of weeks, months, maybe even years of some of the grittiest, nastiest warfare where you fought like a dog. And then the victory came when you finally just rested and let the Lord do his thing. It's funny. It's almost kind of irritating that he's so good at what he does. You know, it's like, why couldn't you do that when I was fighting? Well, because then you would have took the glory. You would have took the glory for the victory for how hard you fought. And the glory comes in the rest. The victory happens in the rest. That's what sitting at the table and communing is all about. It's about resting in the Lord. So, but my emotions, they're deceiving, man. My emotions are going to tell me to react in these certain ways, and I have to be careful with that stuff because my emotions are limited. My emotions only understand what's right in front of them. My emotions don't know tomorrow or the next day. My emotions don't see the outcome. My emotions are basing upon an impossible outcome that is always, if you'll notice, rooted in fear. And so therefore it reacts appropriately to its limited sight, its limited vision. But yet we trust them so much, but we need to be aware that they are limited. We need to be aware also that our intellect is limited. That just because you don't understand right now does not mean that you are hopeless to justify you reacting in fear. That's where the emotions take advantage, is because we get to the point where we don't understand and we don't know and we can't foresee, and so we kind of panic here, and all we can see is a negative outcome. All we can see is a fearful outcome, and so the emotion says, I can respond to fear all day long. Let me have it. And we go. And we're cussing out. And we're making bad choices, and we're freaking out, and we're panicking, and we're saying things we shouldn't be saying. In Job chapter 15, matter of fact, Eliphaz kind of calls Job out on something very similar. Job is just, if you read chapters 13 and 14, Job is just going off about dying. He's just super negative. He's over it. And Eliphaz tells him in verses 11 and 12, he says, "Are the comforts of God too small for you? Or the word that deals gently with you? Why does your heart carry you away? And why do your eyes flash that you turn your spirit against God and bring such words out of your mouth?" There's a lot of wisdom there in what Eliphaz, I know that went into verse 13, but of what he says to Job. He says, "Are the comforts of God too small for you now, Job? Is all the promises God's made, how faithful He's always been to you, does that mean nothing right now at this moment?" Verse 12, he says, "Why does your heart carry you away?" You look up that word heart, guess what it links to? Your emotions and your intellect. Now, if you know the story of Job, you get to the end, and one of the things that Job says to God that's so famous, he's like, "I thought I knew you before, but man, I really know you now." Job was saying things and believing things from a limited perspective. And that's what Eliphaz is saying here. He's like, man, you're letting your heart carry you away. You're letting your emotions speak for you right now, Job. David could have done that, but thankfully he didn't. But we've had situations. How many times have you ever let your emotions speak for you? You just let it fly. Did it make things better? Did it feel as good as you thought it was going to feel? It never does. It always seems to make things worse. But then the next challenge comes and we let them have the mic again. Here, say it again. Like we think social media is bad because everybody has a microphone. It's the same thing. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing emotions carry people away. They're speaking straight from their deceived, limited perspective hearts. Your heart carries you away. Your eyes flash, Job. And he's like, it's doing so, and you turn your spirit against God, and you bring these kind of words into your mouth. Walking by faith and not by sight. The skill here is the skill of being able to close your eyes. To just shut your eyes. Because my eyes are seeing things, but what they are seeing is limited. I'm either going to trust what my limited eyes can perceive, or I'm going to practice the skill of shutting my eyes and trusting my Father. Because when you shut your eyes and you choose to perceive this now from a faith position, you are now seeing the situation from the eyes of God Himself. I want you to think about that. You are now choosing to not trust my limited vision here, but to trust the vision of my Father. And here's one of the things you may not know about the vision of your Father. If you were here Wednesday night, what did we learn about the foreknowledge of God? It's pretty darn big, right? God knows way more than we give Him credit for sometimes. So when I'm choosing to shut my eyes, I'm closing off my emotions, I'm closing off my intellect, I'm closing off my wisdom and my grit and my determination and my strength. I'm shutting my eyes to all of that and saying, Father, how would you have me to respond? What would you have me do? Because God's going to be looking at your situation from a completely different perspective. Totally different perspective, and it's not limited. There's a story in 1 Peter chapter 1 where Peter is talking to us about salvation. And I'll just paraphrase kind of what he says here. But it's in 1 Peter 1 if you want to go back and read it. But he's talking about our salvation. He says, now, concerning this salvation that we have, he says, the prophets of old, back in the Old Testament, there's over 300 prophecies in the Old Testament regarding the Messiah and God's plan for salvation, all this stuff. Over 300 of them. And he says that they spoke these prophecies and they inquired of these prophecies very carefully. And what he means is that these prophets were speaking these prophecies from God, but they did not understand what they meant. They didn't get it. So I want you to think about that. Being a prophet and you say a word from the Lord, but you don't even understand it. That's a level of trust right there. That's trust, because my intellect goes crazy on something like that. How many times does our intellect say, I will not believe anything that I cannot explain? Right? I will not believe or trust God for anything that I cannot explain, hold on to, wrap in a nice, neat little package. But yet the Old Testament, we have prophecies going forward and prophets speaking these things and say, look, I have no idea what this means in full. But one thing I do know, that this is from the Lord, and this is what he said. And Peter says they didn't get it, but they would inquire of it, meaning that after God would use them to speak these things, they would go back to him and say, Lord, what were you saying through us? What does this mean? Now, we have hindsight to the plan of God. We're on the other side of the cross, and so now we can look back at these prophecies and go, how could y'all not see it? But if you were there in the moment without seeing, even the disciples, when Jesus would talk to them about dying, they were like, what are you talking about? It didn't make sense. But they trusted God enough that even when their intellect could not comprehend what was being said, they stayed committed to it. They stayed faithful to that word. Peter goes on to say, he says, how much more? How much more should we be committed now that we know the plan of God? Yet we don't seem to be as faithful to the plan as they were, and they didn't even understand it. But then also he goes on to say that they did come to the conclusion. One thing they did come to the conclusion was that this was not going to be something that they would probably be able to see. It was for you. Peter said they were able to comprehend that this was not something that they would ever be able to see manifest, more than likely, that this was going to be something for future generations. And it was. I was talking with Cedric this week. We were messing around working, and he shared with me a proverb that I can't stop thinking about. It's so good when he said that old men will plant trees that they know that they'll never see the shade of. And I thought about that all week long, and then it was hilarious when he was saying that, and I was reading that, and I was like, that's what those prophets were doing. They were being faithful to plant the word of God and speak the word of God, even when they knew, I'll never see this manifest. Not here on earth, at least. So we look at ourselves, guys, and we have to come to the point to realize that the response and how God would have us to respond a lot of times, we have to do something these guys did. They considered the bigger picture. They did not look at individual situations from just a single eye, what my limited perspective can be. They looked at situations from a kingdom, eternal mentality. That this is not just about me. This time here is not just about me. It's not just about my limited number of years on this earth. It's not just about this. It's about the kingdom. Amen. There's a much, much bigger thing going on here. There's a lot more going on with my life and God's kingdom than I choose to realize a lot of times. And then Peter goes on to command the people to be sober-minded about this. He says, be sober-minded about these things, guys. Don't get caught up. He says, realize how long this has been unfolding. Be smart about this. Be alert. And I love that sober-mindedness. Paul talked a lot about this throughout 1st and 2nd Timothy and the Thessalonians. Paul would over and over and over be sober-minded, be sober-minded, be sober-minded. Be alert. Be wise. Be aware. It doesn't mean walk by fear. Don't walk wondering if Satan is behind this bush or this bush or this bush. You go through life. You live your life. Live it free. Live it full of joy. But be aware that challenges will come. So if I know that challenges are going to come, I'm not going to be so naive as to believe that my life is just going to be hunky-dory from here on out. Nothing's ever going to come against me. I know Satan's going to try me. He fired at me yesterday, and he missed. He's probably going to fire again maybe today, maybe tomorrow. I don't know, but he hates me. He's going to fire at me. But I don't live in that fear. I don't wake up and just go, I hope Satan don't get me today. But I do wake up knowing that sucker's probably going to take a shot at me today. Thankful that I know the Father. Thankful that I'm a son. If you go to the beach today and you walk out there and there's a yellow flag, what does that mean? It means caution, right? Now, are you still going to get in the water? Yeah. Matter of fact, you're more excited now, huh? Ooh, the waves be a little bit bigger. That's how we think. Now even if it's red, we're like, I probably shouldn't, but I think I will. I don't like the purple flag because I don't want stuff touching me while I'm out there in the water. But so long as I ain't getting nothing. But as long as it ain't a purple flag, I'm in. But if you see that yellow flag, it means what? Be sober-minded, right? Be alert. It doesn't mean don't get in. God's not saying lock yourself in a closet, don't go out there because there's a roaring lion and he's going to get you. In Proverbs, that's what the slothful man does. He says, I will not go out, I will not go to work, I will not live my life because there's lions out there and they'll get you. No, that's not what God's saying. And he says, look, go get in the water, have fun, splash around. The waves are even bigger today, but be sober-minded. Now, I've got 2 kids. So as a dad, as a parent, when I'm out there in the water and I'm having fun, but most of all, what am I doing? I'm watching my kids. Even if it's a green flag, I'm watching. Because we know about currents, right? Currents are out there. So currents in this situation are those fears, those condemnations, those panic moments, those temptations, all that stuff that is just trying to draw us into an emotional baptism where we just get immersed in an emotional breakdown and we're just totally committed to the flesh. That's what those currents are doing. They're trying to, and so, there's these flags that God says is, look, man, hey, there's currents out there. Get in the water, have fun, but be aware of them. Now, if you've ever been pulled by a current, it's a weird thing. It's kind of a helpless feeling sometimes. But what do most people do whenever the current starts pulling them out? They start doing this, right? They are wearing themselves out trying to fight this current. Guess what you're going to do? Die tired. That's what you're going to do, man. You're not going to paddle hard enough to outdo that current. It's just not going to happen. But why do we do that? Because we're afraid. That's fear. That's a panic emotional response, right? Is it based in wisdom? No. Is it based in truth and intelligence? No. It is instinctual, fearful response. And it's going to get you killed. And the same thing applies spiritually. There's always a fearful response to choose. Always. There's always a scrambling, clawing, and look, you're fighting hard, and I commend you, man. You are paddling like crazy. You're making a big to-do out there, but you're still going out. You're still getting sucked out. What are we supposed to do when the current starts pulling? Anybody who's been much time at the beach? Just relax and go which direction? Sideways. Now, when the current starts to pull you, you may, for the first 10, 20 seconds, do this. But then, hopefully, what's going to be going like, oh, wait a minute. I know how to respond to this. First of all, calm down and respond the right way, right? What did he say? That reminds me of a funny story we may tell in just a minute. But anyway, and it might not be funny if I tell it. But anyway, so yeah, that's the response. Calm down, swim sideways. That's exactly what God has given us. Calm down. David's clawing the current, and the current's sucking him. It's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. It is literally drawing him into darkness. But David strengthened himself in the Lord. He composed himself. That's what when Paul and Peter, these guys are saying, be sober-minded, be alert, means to gird yourself. It means what these men would do, they wore the long robes, it says basically to roll up your robe and get ready. Now they would get ready sometimes to run, like Elijah did. Sometimes it was to fight. Sometimes it was just to argue. It'd be the equivalent today of if you see two guys and it's heating up and they start doing this, pulling the pants up. What are you doing? You're getting ready. Something's going to pop off. And so it's the same thing. That's what he's saying. He's like, prepare yourself. Be alert in this situation. When the current starts sucking, you say, wait a minute. I know how God has told me to respond here. To relax, to rest in Him, to seek His face. I need to go into my closet for a little while. Don't you want to freak out? No. I've done that before. It didn't work. I'm going to go just sit and be with my Father. The world's not going to understand it. And I want to tell you something. If you've got people around you that don't understand it, love them, but get away from them. Because a lot of people that drown trying to save somebody else, they end up dragging other people down. If you have people around you that are only wanting and only concerned and responding emotionally, hey, look, I love you, but I don't do that. I want to be surrounded by people who are going to speak into my life from the Spirit. That's what I want. Oh, yours sounds juicier. Yeah. But I want life out of this, man. I want to respond the right way. I want health, prosperity. I want breakthrough. I want victory. And I love you, but that's just not the avenue. I've walked that way for years. It's just not going to work. And guys, it's hard to do. It's hard to have that sometimes. But the Lord leads you, man. That's one of the wonderful benefits of church is God surrounds us with each other to give those counsels and to be on the beach, say, hey, look, stop paddling, relax. Start swimming this way. I'll meet you over here. You know, that's what church does for one another. That's what we're there to do. And so, anyway, guys, Father, we thank you. Thank you for your word. Thank you for your counsel, your wisdom. Lord, everybody in this room, I heard it said one time, Lord, you're either in a battle, coming out of a battle, or about to go into a battle. We always seem to be in one of those three stages. Father, for anybody, I'll say for everybody that's in those three stages, I just pray right now, Lord, that they would have a revelation, an understanding, an acceptance that the seed would plant and root and grow deep, to not just surrender to their emotions, to not just surrender to fears and condemnation and bad counsel, bad advice, or to fleshly temptation, or to misunderstanding or lies or anything like that. Lord, just help us to shut our eyes. Just close our eyes to everything that is limited. And to walk by faith. To walk trusting you, Lord, that how you are telling us to respond may not seem, my intellect may not understand why you're telling me to respond this way. But my intellect does not have to understand. Sometimes, Lord, we're too smart for our own good. We think too much about this stuff instead of just surrendering and letting you lead. Some of the people that I've seen struggle the most with faith are people who are incredibly smart. But that was also their downfall. Lord, that's where we need to be like little children. Open and accepting of mystery. Open to new adventures with you, for you to teach us new things, show us new things, take us new places. Let us be like little children in that, Father. I just lift up this entire body. Because as I said, Lord, everybody in this room, they're either coming out of something, going into something, in something right now. Father, you are good and you are there and the table is set. I pray that right now, Lord, they will sit at it. They will commune with you. Help us, Lord, not to be a people, though, Lord, that only sits with you when things are bad. Let it be a table that we pull up to and we sit at permanently. Daily communion. We bless you, Father. Love you so much. And just ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.